Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS. And today I'm going to give you my 250 greatest films of all time list, according to IMDb. And I'm going to be talking about the 29th spot because I recently found out, and this is that the 29th spot on the list is in fact Star Wars: A New Hope. So I'm going to be doing my review for that film, but I'm also going to be doing this. There's a double reason for it. I was originally going to do, I don't know whether it was number 79 or whether it was number 85 first, but instead of doing any of those films, which is what I would have done, I'm sadly going to be jumping ahead. Well, not sadly, because I really do want to talk about this film, but I am basically going to be talking about this film because of something that happened just yesterday, or I got the news just last night, saying that the wonderful actor James Earl Jones has sadly passed away at the age of 93. And for those of you who don't know, James Earl Jones is a Hollywood legend. He was famous for being in films like Coming to America and the voice of Mufasa in The Lion King, and he was also the voice of Darth Vader in today's film that we're talking about. But he also was a really great, just wonderful presence in regards to his reputation in Hollywood. He famously was in an episode of Sesame Street. And he was just a really lovely guy. Whenever I see him in interviews, he just seems like a very wonderful, very down-to-earth guy. But whenever I, see him in things, he always manages to do his best, even in films like, Field of Dreams, where he is basically playing among, great, Hollywood juggernauts. He really does manage to give a good performance in that film. And there's so many good roles that he did. But one of my favourites, and one of the roles that really did make it for me as Darth Vader being one of my favourite characters, is Darth Vader. And I feel like that's one of the things that I really just love about this film. And I love these characters, and I love the world of Star Wars. Like, I've always loved Star Wars, ever since as far back as I can remember, because this was created by a guy who, up until this point, he'd only made one other film. And that was a coming-of-age film. George Lucas made a coming-of-age film called American Graffiti, which is meant to be sort of like a semi-biographical film about his time growing up in the 1950s, about him being a teenager in the 1950s. And it's a very thought-provoking film. It's a very personal film, and you can really tell it's a very personal film for George. And it really does feel like a genuine, beautiful examination of youth and growing up and moving on from your friends and your, great, escapades and traditions that you have, and going out into the bigger, wider world. And there's so many films like that were made back in the 70s. Another great classic is a film called The Wanderers, which is the same story as American Graffiti, where it's essentially these group of people who've known each other for years, and they love, going around the streets, having fun, having a lark, listening to rock and roll and things like that. But then the world is very slowly changing around them, and they don't know what to do about it. And in many cases, it's a very personal, very interconnected story in both films. And I think both films deserve their own, watch, and they do deserve their own, level as a cult classic status, because they're both brilliant films. But George Lucas really started out his career in making that film, and then he went on to, make Star Wars, which became this wonderful juggernaut of a masterpiece of cinema. And now people are often calling it, it's a dead franchise, it's dying, it's been, on its last legs, it's been on life support since, Disney got its hands on it. But what's really interesting is that Star Wars will always be its own thing, and it'll always move to its own tempo, even if, Disney makes all the rules about where it goes. Star Wars will always follow its own lead. Star Wars is kind of like the Sam Raimi of film franchises, where it will always follow its own lead, regardless of what other people tell it to do. And I think that's something that's really quite interesting about Star Wars as a franchise, is they've always followed, danced to their own tune, even if someone else, starts to butt in and give them advice on what to do. And that's what's really wonderful. But what I really think is important is that Star Wars was my introduction to, really good storytelling and taking storytelling seriously. Because I saw Star Wars: The Phantom Menace back when, in 1999, and I think it was about 4 or 5 years old when that film first came out, and I went to go see it at the cinema, and it blew me away. Like, I absolutely just loved it. And a lot of people are saying that, oh, you poor man, I'm going to go see Star Wars and that's your introduction to the world. But my dad took me home afterwards and he showed me A New Hope, and I absolutely loved that even more. And I really got sad because in The Phantom Menace, we see a character who becomes effectively the hero of that film, Obi-Wan Kenobi, kill Darth Maul, but then in A New Hope, we see him as an old man getting killed, spoiler alert, by Darth Vader in the sort of like the bridge between the second act and the third act. And that moment was very sad for me, because I knew that was Obi-Wan Kenobi as an old man, and he was now, he now is sort of reliving that trauma of, seeing someone, witness his death, but then he's almost like surrendering. But in the case of, Qui-Gon, it didn't quite seem that way. So the film is a wonderful plethora of all these great callbacks, all these great references, and that's all down to George Lucas's storytelling. Like, the film begins with a ship flying out, sort of coming into view as sort of like swallowing up the screen as it's coming into view, and it's sort of like firing back at this other ship, and then you see the big ship that's almost coming in like a shark. And in The Phantom Menace, there's a line that Qui-Gon Jinn, played by Liam Neeson, says, called "There's always a bigger fish," and that's a great, dialogue callback to that very opening shot in A New Hope, where the ship just sort of comes into view like a shark, and it's kind of chasing this little fish, this little ship, to get to its, main control centre. And then, of course, there's this big shootout, and then Darth Vader makes his entrance in sort of like a fog or like a mist of smoke, and it's really well done. It's a very iconic entrance. And after kidnapping the Princess Leia Organa, who is actually the ambassador for her home planet of Alderaan, she says she's on a diplomatic mission of the Imperial Senate, and this is absolute, tyranny, you can't do this to me. And Darth Vader just says in a very iconic line, he points to her and he goes, "You are the head of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor, take her away." And it really does show how intimidating this guy is. And then, of course, two droids named by the name of C-3PO and R2-D2 manage to escape, but not before Princess Leia makes a very personal holographic video where she can basically tell anyone who she wants that, she's being held captive, and she has plans for the Death Star and, for the Rebel Alliance. So if she's able to do that, she needs to get in contact with someone called Obi-Wan Kenobi. And the droids come out of this ship and they land on Tatooine, and they end up falling into the clutches of Uncle Owen and Aunt Peru, who have a farm boy, aka nephew, called Luke Skywalker, played by the wonderful Mark Hamill. And when he's actually cleaning one of the droids, R2-D2, he accidentally triggers the message that Leia Organa set for them. And when he hears the name Obi-Wan Kenobi, he starts to, connect the dots, and he thinks to himself, who is Obi-Wan Kenobi? And he goes, he isn't that guy who used to visit me when I was a kid, old Ben Kenobi? And he goes, no. His Uncle Owen goes, no, he died around the same time as your father. And he goes, oh, I see. And I just really love that entire opening dynamic, because a lot of stories do have this sort of setup where this character is kind of living with their aunt and uncle, and in the case of Harry Potter, it's kind of like, oh, he's not very happy there because they mistreat him. But Uncle and Aunt Peru are actually really good guardian figures, because they are basically saying to him, you can do whatever the hell you want with the money that you have, but you also have to realise that we're on our own and we're literally looking after this farm by ourselves. We can't look after the farm and raise money for your flight academy training and your cadet training. And he goes, oh, but you said I could, do whatever I wanted, like the world's my oyster and things like that. And he goes, you said if I did enough stuff on the farm, you'll give me, enough, money to, go to flight school and to the academy, to the cadet academy. And his Uncle Owen goes, I told you to forget it, because we can't, help you. We can't, raise this farm and do this stuff that we're doing here, and also, help you with your career, so you have to stay for a while. We will give you the money for Flight Academy, but it won't be this soon. And Luke just kind of shrugs it off and goes, okay, Uncle Owen. He's like very humble. But then there's that moment where he walks out in the middle of the night, and as the sun's setting, and you see those dual suns, and you literally can see, without even a single line of dialogue, that Luke wants more. He's like, I know it's a bit cliched, but it's kind of like the Disney princess philosophy of, oh, I want more. Whereas in the case of Luke, he does want to go to flight school. He wants to go to flight school because he wants to leave Tatooine. He wants to leave this place that he grew up in, and he wants to go out and see the world. He's thirsty for adventure, kind of like a lot of men in the 70s were. Like a lot of the directors who became, these great icons of cinema, like Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola, they were men like Luke who were itching to get outside and to, really kind of, make their mark on cinema and make their mark in storytelling. And they did to a certain extent. Martin Scorsese made Italian American, which is a wonderful documentary about his parents, and all these other directors made these wonderful personal films. George Lucas himself, like I said, made American Graffiti, and George Lucas and Luke Skywalker are very similar. That they are very similar. They're itching to get outside, and they're itching to get to make their own legacy. So while he's going out, just doing his regular everyday runs, he runs into the Sand People, and he runs into a strange elderly man called Old Ben. And it's here that he shows him the message that Leia Organa has sent in regards to her being captured by the Empire, and she needs help. And Obi-Wan Kenobi, knowing that he's way out of his element, he's way old than he used to be, he asks Luke to help him, not before giving him his famous weapon that what used to be his father's, a lightsaber, a more dignified weapon from a more civilized age. And they even talk about things like the Clone Wars and things like that. And all these things are peppered in throughout the opening act of the film. Little did we know that as Star Wars fans, we would get way more than we even bargained for. And honestly, I would recommend, please check out the Star Wars The Clone Wars TV series on Disney+. It is amazing. It is the Avatar The Last Airbender of Star Wars TV shows. And I'm not talking about the live action M. Night Shyamalan Avatar film. I'm talking about the TV series, the original animated series that was aired way back at Nickelodeon. It's literally the Star Wars equivalent of that show for me in regards to what it did with the Star Wars mythology, what it did with the characters, and the origin story of Darth Vader. And I feel like that's just a really good piece of television serialization. And they decide to go to Mos Eisley, where there's never been a more wretched hive of scum and villainy and things like that. It's a really good sequence. They go into this bar, and there's all these wonderful eccentric aliens, and they meet along the way Chewbacca, who is a Wookiee, who is basically like a giant dog with sort of like a sort of Homo sapien, humanoid structure, and but he's also like a dog. He like barks and grunts and growls, and he has a friend called Han Solo, who is a scavenger and a bit of a crook, but he's a lovable crook because he's played by Harrison Ford, who is charismatic as fuck in this role. Like, honestly, he is so wonderful and so charming. He's such a really wonderful guy, but he's also a sleazeball, but he's a lovable sleazeball kind of thing. And I really love it. And I love their conversation. I like the fact that they're asking to get him a ship, and he's basically just very kind of uncertain at first, but then he's like saying, we'll pay extra if you give us a certain ship. And he goes, okay, you got yourself a ship. And it's all really wonderful. And then there's that wonderful scene with the alien where the alien goes, Gorda solo, and things like that. And it's really wonderful. And you really do get a sense that Han Solo isn't an altogether good guy. Like, the first thing he does, even without being prompted, he shoots him in the blink of an eye after he basically talks about Jabba the Hutt and him getting his money. So he knows that he's in a very tight position. But instead of actually trying to negotiate, which is what people would do, he just shoots him. Unlike in various other cuts where they try to make it more heroic by having the alien creature Guido shoot first. Or whatever his name is. And I thought that was actually really interesting, but I feel like it's much better having him just shoot him right off the bat, because he knows that he can't get his way out of it. And also the alien's pointing the gun at him anyway, so either way he was either going to die or he was going to be escorted to Jabba himself. But what's very interesting is he shoots him first, and that just goes to show there's something dangerous about Han. And he even, has this moment where he looks at the bartender and he goes, please return your drinks, you saw nothing here, and he throws him like some money on the table, and it's like, he's a really shady bastard, and it's really well articulated there. And then they go on this ship, they fly out of there when they know they're in a very unrestricted zone, and they fly out into space. And all the while, Luke Skywalker is training to be a Jedi, and he's trained to be a Jedi by, wearing a sort of like coverall mask, a blind, and essentially, doing his lightsaber practice. And all Obi-Wan Kenobi can do is just tell him the nature of the Force, and he goes, your eyes are irrelevant, don't trust them when using the Force. And remember that, ladies and gentlemen, remember that scene when he's training, he goes, I can't see anything with this blindfold. Remember that scene, because that comes into play much later on when it comes to the climax of the film. So they go on board this ship, and it's all fun and games to begin with, like Han Solo and Luke Skywalker knock out a few stormtroopers, and they end up assuming their disguises and taking Wookiee Chewbacca as a prisoner. they decide to basically go ahead as planned. But then, of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi takes off his own route. He shuts off the power reactor, and he essentially senses that Darth Vader is nearby. So him and Darth Vader have a duel, and all while that's happening, Luke Skywalker and Han Solo manage to track down Leia Organa and essentially try to rescue her. But before that scene happens, there's an entire exchange between her, Grand Moff Tarkin, and Darth Vader, where he's keeping a prisoner, and he's even tried to inject a bit of truth serum into her. But then Grand Moff Tarkin has much more sinister plans for her up his sleeve, where he goes, if you're not going to tell us anything of why you're here, what's your real mission, we're going to make sure that we test out our new toy, this obliterator thing, on your home planet of Alderaan. And she goes, well, I don't know anything. I was literally here on a diplomatic mission. You can't do this. And she goes, no, I can do whatever the hell I want. And essentially basically blows up the planet. And the look on Leia Organa's face, Carrie Fisher's face, when that moment happens, like, you really do feel like she's just lost. Her home was there 5 minutes, and then within a blink of an eye, it just explodes, and it's really brutal. And you can just tell on her face that she's lost her family there. She's lost everything. And also, Uncle Owen and Aunt Peru are dead. They die at the hands of stormtroopers when they're still back on Tatooine. And I really do like the fact that, Obi-Wan says to him, like, I couldn't save them, it was too dangerous. And he goes, can I come with you? Like, there's nothing left for me here. And it's really well done. And I really love Mark Hamill in his performance, because he really does show that he is basically a wide-eyed innocent. He's very plucky. He's very, very, very kind of enthusiastic about things, but he's also very naive as well. Like, when he first sees the ship, he literally says, what a piece of junk. And it's like, he literally is going to say exactly what's on his mind. Like, he is at that teenagery type stage in his life where he is going to be very complaining and very mopey, but at the same time, he is very, open to learn things at his own pace. And it's a very good character, and he is very well defined here. And also, there's this very wonderful moment where Luke Skywalker enters the room of Princess Leia's chambers, and she goes, she sits up and she goes, well, you're a little shorter than your average stormtrooper, or you're a little shorter than I expected for a stormtrooper. And then Luke Skywalker goes, wait, what, this? And he just takes off his helmet, and he goes, I'm Luke Skywalker, I'm here to rescue you. And she goes, Luke who? And it's really well done, and I love it, and I love Carrie Fisher's performance, and I love what she says throughout the course of this entire exchange. Like, when they're running through the corridors, she looks down at the platform at the ship and she goes, you arrived in that thing? You're braver than I thought. And she says to Chewbacca, can someone get this walking carpet out of my way, and things like that. Like, she is really funny, and she's very feisty, and I think Carrie Fisher brings a lot of herself to this role, and she really does feel like, I'm literally in the worst position imaginable, and I have to really kind of get myself out of this horrible situation, and I don't care if these amateurs escort me out here with blasters and dressed as stormtroopers. I'm going to make myself get out of this mess. And I love the fact that when they're in this hallway and they're being shot at by stormtroopers, she literally has this moment where she's like, someone has to get us out of this situation, and she grabs a blaster and she literally just goes up in the corridor and she starts firing at the stormtroopers. And it's really wonderful, because she is one of those people who has a very hands-on approach to her rescue, and she literally shoots one of the grates and they land in this compactor place where all the garbage goes. And that's a good sequence where they're trying to get in contact with 3PO, but 3PO can't actually understand them or can't get through to them because he's trying to pretend to be like a protocol droid on the ship of the Death Star. That's a great sequence. The entire sequence with Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi is brilliant. Like, when Darth Vader goes, when I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master. And Obi-Wan goes, only a master of evil, Darth. And then they start fighting. And then he goes, you can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you could possibly imagine. And it's such great quotable dialogue. It's so wonderful. And then this was the moment that made me sad when I first watched it, because there's a moment when Luke Skywalker and co leave, and they're out there on the platform, and he literally sees Obi-Wan Kenobi facing off against Darth Vader, and he's so frightened and so shocked. But then Obi-Wan Kenobi just sort of looks over at him, and then he essentially looks back, and then he just sort of raises his lightsaber, and he shuts his eyes, because he knows that this is the end of the road for him. And when I saw that moment as a kid, having just watched The Phantom Menace and seeing how heroic Obi-Wan Kenobi was in that scene where he beats Darth Maul, and then he comforts his old master as he's dying. It's really sad when you find out that he basically does the same heroic thing again, but this time he's now the mentor who has to sacrifice himself in order to make sure that his protege, his Padawan, is safe. And it's really powerful and it's really well done. And I literally had such a shocked reaction when I first saw that. Like, I was genuinely very sad that happened to Obi-Wan at the very end. And I literally felt like Luke in that moment when he goes, no! And it's like, it's really sad. And I really could have found myself going, please, just leave. Like, you can't do anything for him. The grate's closing and the stormtroopers are running up and Darth Vader's like prodding him with his cloak and things like that. And it's really intense. And then what's really wonderful is Luke gets his own back. He gets his own back on Darth Vader in one way or another, because they have this great big starship battle where they have to get to the Death Star. And when he's there, when he's in the cockpit and he's being, harassed by Darth Vader in his battleship, and Han Solo comes to the rescue, there's that wonderful moment where Obi-Wan Kenobi talks to him and he says, before he died, he said the words, "The Force will be with you always." And that's the last thing Obi-Wan said to him before he died. And then he comes back to him in the Force and he goes, "Don't use your eyes, search your feelings and all will be right." And he just basically has this moment where he's got the monitor, he's got everything that he needs to actually physically see where the trajectory of the beam should go in order to blow up the Death Star. But he knows that through using the Force, he doesn't need to use his eyes. Hence why that scene from earlier is so important, where he essentially says, your eyes aren't the be-all and everything, don't trust them, and things like that. And I really do think that's a really wonderful line, because that's basically an example of Chekhov's gun, which is where if a gun is introduced in Act 1, it has to go off by Act 3, and that's essentially the Chekhov's gun moment, where you have to remember that line of dialogue where he says, don't trust your eyes, they're not always useful. Because that's what Luke has to do in order to blow up the Death Star. And it's really well done, and it's a really well done sequence. A lot of people complained that, oh yeah, why is there this great big gaping hole in the Death Star? Who designed this ship? But if you watch Star Wars Rogue One, that's actually a huge part of the plot, and it's very well done, and I just really love it, and I thought that was just perfect. This film, even though it has a few wonky moments of dialogue, this film is literally perfect from a screenplay perspective. Like, this film is just so well done, such a great way of showing how he tells stories and how he's able to sort of build stories through just this really simple telling of a tale, this telling of this very ancient tale as old as time itself, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And it's really beautiful. It's a really beautiful film. It's really fantastic. It's got great performances. And when the ending comes and when that explosion happens where the Death Star explodes and everyone, all the villains die, but then Darth Vader, is just sent off into the ether, but he will return. It's such a wonderful moment. And then that moment where you go, where there's the medal ceremony, that's such a wonderful moment. And it really goes to show that George Lucas really did love making this film, even though he might not have had a good time making it when he was a director, because he had such pressure on him and he didn't know what he was doing. He was really, lacking in confidence, because this was his second feature film. You really do get the impression that he really was giving it his all with this film. And you really can tell that in a screenplay perspective, he really did his best, and he really did a good job of telling a really good story from start to finish. And it's just amazing. And then, of course, this gave birth to 2 other films in the original trilogy. It also gave birth to 3 great prequels, even though they're not perfect. They still are good, and they still are worth watching. I still think if you want to see a better version of the prequels fully realised, I'd definitely check out the Clone Wars animated series on Disney+. It's brilliant. Like I said, it's the Star Wars... It's to Star Wars what Avatar The Last Airbender was to Nickelodeon. The original Avatar The Last Airbender series was to that company, effectively. It literally is that. It's such a good story. It's well written. It's got great world building, great characters, great unique characters, as well as the characters that we love. And it's all really wonderful. But I love Star Wars, and I literally just feel sad right now, because now we won't see any more of James Earl Jones. We won't see any more of his... We won't hear his voice anymore. We won't hear any more of his, great characters come to life. It's just really sad, and I just find myself thinking, whenever I hear Darth Vader's voice now, I'm not going to be thinking of James Earl Jones. I'm going to be thinking, oh, that's AI'd. And it's really sad, because I really do love the character of Darth Vader, and whenever I hear that voice, I always get the chills. I was watching a reaction video on a scene from Avatar, Jedi Survivor, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and there was a scene where Darth Vader appears behind a character. And I can remember all the gamers in that video were reacting, and you could literally see some of them were literally staring wide-eyed, their jaws on the floor, absolutely in shock when they hear that breathing. It's really wonderful, and it really is intimidating. My version of it was terrible, but I think it's such an intimidating sound, and it's just so wonderful. But this film is just fantastic. It's one of the greats. I love it. It will always be one of my favourite trilogies, one of my favourite films of all time. I love Star Wars. I love everything that's gone to be, but I feel like, sadly, a lot of people are right when they say that it's kind of going downhill, but I feel like there is still hope for Star Wars. There still is hope for Star Wars. There will always be hope. And I really do hope that they come back from whatever pit or plummet they're in right now, because I do think that they're wonderful. And Darth Vader was one of the best parts of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. He was the best part of Rogue One, even though Rogue One was still a good film, and I still enjoyed the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. I still thought it was wonderful. It was a great way of, making sure that the original prequels tied in very well with A New Hope. And there was another thing that made me quite sad rewatching this for this video, where there's a look that Leia Organa gives when she sees Obi-Wan Kenobi, where she looks slightly afraid, but she looks slightly disheartened as well. Like, she can't believe that that's Obi-Wan. That's the person who she went on this crazy adventure with when she was a kid. And it's a really beautiful, very powerful moment that really hits harder when you watch it when you watch it having watched that series. And there's so many wonderful things here that get paid off, and I like that, call back to that visual shot in, The Phantom Menace. There's so many good things in the Star Wars series, and even in the prequels, guys. Come on, die-hard Star Wars fans, you've got to admit that the prequels are somewhat good, or they have good things in them, because they really do deserve a lot of reappraisal and reassessment, because they are really wonderful. So yeah, that's my review for Star Wars A New Hope. I hope you guys really enjoyed it, and if you liked this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to see more, please think about subscribing today. I hope you are having a very good day. I will be doing another video later on today. It will be my review on the film Blink Twice. I can't wait to talk about that. But yeah, I hope you're all doing very well. This has been Josh with WHIMS, and I hope you're all doing very well. Take care, bye for now.